chapter 3, verse 1. I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He has led me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. Surely he has turned his hand against me time and time again throughout the day. He's aged my flesh and my skin and broken my bones. He's besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and woe. He has set me in dark places like the dead of long ago. He's hedged me in so that I cannot get out. He's made my chain heavy. Even when I cry and shout, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with hewn stone. He has made my paths crooked. He's been to me a bear lying in wait, like a lion in ambush. He has turned aside my ways and torn me in pieces. He has made me desolate. He has bent his bow and set me up as a target for the arrow. And then just a few verses later, he comes to how great his faithfulness and how his mercies are new every morning. Turn to the beginning of the book, Lamentations chapter 1. Lamentations is actually a series of 5 poems which are acrostics. Each begins with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and then goes through each of the letters of the alphabet. It was a typical way of writing Hebrew poetry. Look at what he sees as he is looking at the city. Verse 1, chapter 1, book of Lamentations. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she is, who was great among the nations. The princess among the provinces has become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night. Her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into captivity under affliction and hard servitude. She dwells among the nations and finds no rest. All her persecutors overtake her in dire straits. I was reading this book last night, laying in bed, and Krista said, "Why don't you read that to me?" And I said, "No, this is really good bedtime reading. It won't lead to good dreams till you get to chapter 3, verse 22. But then right after that, it goes back to this, because this is what Jeremiah was seeing. And Jeremiah was a prophet who was called at a period of time when Israel was so far away from the Lord, in rebellion against him. And Jeremiah knew what was going to happen. It was sealed in stone. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. What Manasseh had done as king had sealed the fate of Jerusalem. And now it was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. It was a matter of when. Jeremiah himself had a message to the people of warning, of trying to lead them to Christ, and they rejected him. They called him an old man. They threw stones at him. Various times they threw him in a pit. They threw him in prison. And they did not follow his prophecies, his teaching. And God's judgment fell. But what I want you to know this morning is that God's mercy and God's faithfulness are shown even in his judgment. That's what Jeremiah is saying in the book of Lamentations in those verses. Right in the middle of seeing all of this, yet he can say God's faithfulness and mercy are found even in the midst of his judgment. And that is just as true today as it was when Jeremiah penned those words. So flip back to 2 Kings, and we'll take a look at the time period here. I would really encourage you to, as we've been studying through this period of Israel's life, to take a look at some of the other books, to read through the book of Jeremiah, to read through the book of Ezekiel and Daniel, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Because all of that will give you insight into the history, and the history will give you insight into the prophecies. You know, it's easy to open up the book of Jeremiah or Ezekiel and say, "Oh, I think I'll read chapter 35 today." And you open it up and you're going, "I have no idea what this means." And you start trying to take this imagery and apply it to your life today, without understanding what its meaning was in its own day. That's dangerous. It's very dangerous. Good biblical study is to understand the historical context of the day. What was Jeremiah saying to the people who he was speaking to? What was Ezekiel saying to the people he was speaking to? Now when you understand that, then you can understand that, well, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So what he was trying to say through Jeremiah to the people of that day, in their situation, well, in similar situations in my life, God would be saying the same thing. Now you find the way to take those things and apply them to your life, rather than when I was a baby Christian, man, I'd read some of the Old Testament and I could come up with all kinds of wild and woolly things that, well, that's what that's talking about in my life, and it had no meaning whatsoever, because I was skipping that middle step. So we pick it up in chapter 23, actually at verse 26. Verse 26. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath. Now, why would he say nevertheless? Well, because Josiah is king, and he has led a tremendous purging of the nation, and has tried to lead a revival just like Hezekiah did. But unfortunately, this revival was a mile wide and an inch deep. It didn't get to the hearts of the people. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath, with which his anger was aroused against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will also remove Judah from my sight, as I have removed Israel, and I will cast off this city Jerusalem, which I have chosen, in the house of which I said, my name shall be there. Now the rest of the acts of Josiah, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Yeah, they are. In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went to the aid of the king of Assyria to the river of Euphrates. And King Josiah went against him, and Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo when he confronted him. Then his servants moved his body in a chariot from Megiddo, brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, anointed him, and made him king in his father's place. Now let's stop right here for a minute and get the context here from history. As we have seen over the last several weeks, the dominant empire of the day was Assyria. Not Syria, but Assyria. And it had power and sway over Judah. It was the one who had overrun Israel and sent them into captivity. There had been wars and surroundings of Jerusalem in the past. There was war between Assyria and Egypt. And if you look on the map, who's right in the middle and makes a great place to have war? Well, that would be Israel. And so many of the wars took place right there. Well, now Assyria is beginning to wane in power, and this new upstart province is beginning to get power. Its name is Babylon. Babylon gained its independence during this time and began to fight against Assyria. And so Assyria was looking for some help from Egypt, because Egypt was under the command and rule of Assyria. So Egypt was on its way up through Israel to get with Assyria to help in fighting against, it says, at the river Euphrates. Well, we know even today that's Iraq. That's Babylon. The city of Babylon was right in that area. That's the area of the province of Babylon. So as Assyria is coming up to fight, or as Egypt is coming up to fight with Assyria against Babylon, they go through Israel, and Josiah, we don't know why, he stands against them. Now this is unusual, because Israel, we will find, often tries to find alliances with Egypt. But for some reason, Josiah, this good, righteous king, had it in his mind that he needed to keep Egypt from helping Assyria. Don't know why. The book of 2 Chronicles tells us a little bit more about this story, and actually says that when Josiah stood against Pharaoh Necho, and this happened in Israeli territory in the plains of Megiddo, and when he stood against him, Pharaoh Necho actually said to him, don't do this. This is wrong. Yahweh, the Lord, says you shouldn't be doing this. Now, how do we take that? Did Pharaoh Necho know the Lord, and was he following, and Josiah was out of the will? Or was Pharaoh Necho just using Josiah's God's name to try and get some power? Don't know.